Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Back when I was 19, I had a dream that firmly planted the idea in my head that we were actually living in a shoddily designed simulation. I remember that this happened on my 19th birthday. Actually, the first part did. The second part was about a month or so later. On the night of my 19th birthday, I had the weirdest dream that I have ever had. It was probably the most realistic dream that I've ever experienced, to the point where it felt like I was honestly lucid dreaming. Though this was a long time before I even knew what that meant. In this dream, I remember walking down the street, and I recall that my mind was set on going to the grocery store to get a bag of coffee. Something that's not really me. I'm not huge on coffee, honestly. Anyways, I was walking with my earphones in, and a song that I really like came on. I turned my phone up because I was really feeling it, and I remember that I couldn't hear anything around me. I got to the corner where I had to cross to get to the store, and I remember that I was standing there, waiting for the light to change. I remember that I wasn't the only thing waiting for the light to change. There was also another guy standing there with me. And for some reason, what he was wearing stood out to me vividly in this dream. It was a sweatshirt that was orange. It looked like it was covered in paint stains, and I recall that the logo on the top right said something like Cooper Interiors. After a few minutes, it swapped over to the walk sign, and I started into the crosswalk. I stepped into the road with a bit of haste. I remember that I was just really focused on the beat of the song. Then after a few steps, I remember seeing a car coming at me at a ridiculously high speed. Something about that moment felt like it was in a slow motion. I remember looking at the car, at the driver, as he barreled in my direction. I remember looking to my left and seeing the guy in the orange sweatshirt looking at me with terror on his face. I remember seeing the police officers in their cars behind the first driver. It was like I was being given several moments extra to take the entire scene around me and take in the details. Saturday, around noon, guy in the orange interior design sweatshirt, the specific song, and me standing in the middle of the crosswalk on the street next to the grocery store. And the next thing that I knew, I was lying on the ground and feeling cold throughout my body, staring up at a slightly overcast sky. I remember feeling dizzy and not being able to move. Then I recall the guy in the orange sweatshirt running over toward me and the sound of sirens near me. Then I woke up, covered in sweat and freaking out mentally. That dream legit felt like it had happened in real life, almost to the point where I wanted to believe that I actually died and essentially loaded a save file, or something like that. Anyways, on to the really freaky part. A couple months after I had this dream, I was at home and talking with my girlfriend on the phone, and she mentioned that she had just bought some sort of pumpkin spice coffee and that she really liked it. She was saying that it was the best coffee that she had ever had and that I needed to try it. I relented and told her that I would go sometime and get some. She told me that I needed to go now and get it, otherwise I never would. She knew that I didn't really like coffee, and honestly she was right. So I sighed and said fine, then told her that I would call her back when I got home. I threw on my jacket and put in my headphones ready to walk to the store. You probably know where this is going. I was walking down the street with my mind dead set on getting this done pumpkin spice coffee to make my girlfriend happy. I knew I was most likely not going to like it, but it was for her, so I needed to do it. Near the corner where I would need to cross, one of my favorite songs came on, and something about it felt different. Like I was really feeling it. It felt like I hadn't listened to it for years, and it just randomly came on. I reached for the volume button to turn it up but paused. It was at this moment that the dream came back to me. The song was the same. The street was the same. The plan was the same. There was only one thing that was out of place. The guy on the corner. There was still a guy standing there. He was still wearing a paint-stained sweatshirt, and it still said Cooper Interiors. But it wasn't orange. It was really pale blue. I was just standing there and staring at the light, waiting for it to change, and thinking about how that dream went. I pulled my earphones out for a moment and just kind of stood there. And within seconds, I heard police sirens heading in that direction quickly. The light changes over to walk, and at that moment, I felt strange. I got that cold feeling all over again that I had in my dream, almost like it was reminding me what would happen if I did walk. So I just stood there and waited for a few seconds, waiting for the car to zoom down the road at full speed. Sure enough, it did. That car, with that driver, being followed by the exact police officer, all of them blasted through the light and past both myself and the guy in the sweatshirt. And after they passed, the guy next to me chuckled and looked over at me. He said something like, "Damn, good thing you took your earphones out when you did, huh?" I actually laughed and nodded, kind of in awe that this whole situation played out in front of me. That's pretty much it. I dreamt the situation and it almost played out in front of me. Part of me thinks that it was either a prophetic dream where I was given a heads up, or it was another timeline with a perfect storm set up. The only difference in this situation was the color of the sweatshirt. And maybe that was the only thing that needed to be different for this all to unfold in a new way. Also, if anyone wants to know, I didn't like the coffee, and I ended up giving the rest to my girlfriend. A few years ago, I was about to turn into my driveway. I was having my ass ridden by some guy in his BMW. The street had a crazy curve to it, and to get into my driveway, it was sometimes necessary for me to pull a bit closer to the curb to swing the car into the driveway. Well, I slowed down, and this guy with no patience in the BMW decides to zoom around me. In his defense, I forgot to signal, and he clipped the front of my car, tearing the front bumper off and breaking the driver's side headlight. Luckily, nobody was hurt, and besides the guy being a complete asshole, the damage to both vehicles was minimal. I got into the street and picked up the parts of my bumper that flew off and came across the plastic headlight. It was flat but curved, and I thought that I was lucky because when I got hit, I thought it had been broken. I bring it over to the car to see if it will fit back on, and it won't. Not because of the damage, but because it was made for the passenger's side of the car. I checked the passenger's side and sure enough, the headlight was still there. I tried again and again to see if I was losing my mind, but no matter how I positioned the headlight that I found, it was not made to fit on that side, and it was meant for the passenger's side. I thought maybe I had picked up someone else's, or maybe that BMW guy's headlight. So I checked the part number against the one on my passenger's side, and sure enough, they matched. I showed my dad and my friend and neither could figure out or explain it. So I ordered a new headlight for the driver's side and it fit perfectly. It was like I had picked it up from a timeline where I got hit on the other side. This is probably the only glitch event that I've ever experienced, and it was one that was really strange to me. It's one of those things that honestly keeps me up at night sometimes, and it starts to bother me more than it should. Or maybe the fact that this happened and I can't forget it is a form of glitch in and of itself. Or maybe it's not a glitch and just something that happened. But honestly, it doesn't feel like a coincidence as much as something being broken in reality. It was a couple years ago, I think back in the summer of 2018. My wife and I had a few days off of work together, and we decided that we should go see her grandparents on the other end of the state. It's one of those drives that you can do in one go and not stop for anything other than gas, around 9 to 10 hours, if you really have the willpower to do so. And that said, my wife doesn't have the willpower for long drives, so we had to stop at least once during the drive. She's looking at maps on her phone and she sees that there's a convenience store or a gas station a couple exits ahead, and she asks if we can stop. I, of course, agree, and we plan on getting off in the next exit. We make the exit and pull up to the station. She tells me that she'll be right back, and I decide to get out and walk around the car to stretch my legs. And then I fill the tank preemptively. I'm watching the numbers roll on the pump and waiting for her to get back, and after a few moments of waiting, I get back in the car and I'm waiting impatiently. She then comes out and has a look of shock or confusion on her face. I was just thinking that maybe there was a weirdo in there or something. But then she gets in the car and tells me that she had the strangest thing just happen. I ask her what, and she tells me that the clerk in the station looked like my long-lost brother. I laughed at her and said, "Oh, really?" But the look on her face was dead serious. She wasn't joking. I started to brush it off, thinking that maybe we just kind of look similar, only to have her tell me again that this guy looked like an identical twin. Obviously, this piqued my interest, so I parked and we got out of the car to go inside. I opened the door and stepped in, and the clerk looked up to greet us as we entered, but he paused halfway through his sentence. And I think he was going through the same weird feeling that I was going through. We both kind of stood there staring at each other awkwardly for a few seconds. I will tell you that she was right. This guy looked exactly like me, down to the minute details. I have longer black hair. His hair was literally the same length as mine and same color. He had dark green eyes that were the same exact as mine. He even had a small scar on his chin like I do, on the same side and damn near an identical length. He was the same height, same weight, same everything. It was honestly creepy as hell to me to be looking at someone that was basically a clone of myself. I really wasn't sure on what to do, so I stepped up and awkwardly introduced myself. I told him that my wife had told me that there was a guy in the store that looked like me, but I honestly did not expect this. They weren't super busy, so we spent a bit of time chatting about things, and it all just kept getting weirder and weirder with every new detail. My name is Derek. His name was Eric. We were both named after our fathers. My mother's name was Anna, and his mother's name was Hannah. Both of our mothers passed away when we were kids, and we were both born in March of 1996. I was born on the 4th, and he was born on the 14th. The more we talked about things, the more it felt like he and I were identical twins, except he was from a different state altogether and had moved to that area with his girlfriend only a few months prior. We grew up in two totally different states, but honestly, looked like we were related. Now, I know that this may be a coincidence, like I said, but the fact that I would pull into this specific gas station at this time during an impromptu road trip to my wife's grandparents' house across the state and run into someone that looked like they were basically a clone of myself just feels astronomical, like nearly impossible. Hopefully, I run into him again. We didn't exchange phone numbers or details or anything like that. We just kind of reveled in the moment and then decided to move on. If we never run into each other again, I just hope that he's doing well. When I was 16, I took an SAT prep class to improve my score and then get into a good college. The class was pretty boring, but I met the most interesting girl in the class. She was thin, fairly short with light brown hair and green eyes. She always wore a green headband, which I thought was cute, and her name was Connie. We hit it off immediately and spent most of the class whispering to each other at our desk, and I spent about 3 weeks sitting next to her and then talking to her during the class. When the class was over, we exchanged IM handles so we could keep in touch, because this was way in the early 2000s. About a year passed and we continued talking online. We got to know each other pretty well, but we lived on completely different sides of the city, and it was quite a drive to visit each other. So, being the young teens we were, we never actually got together. Eventually, I worked up the courage to ask her out for dinner. I set our date at a restaurant located between the both of us so that we wouldn't have to drive too far. The time for our date rolled around and I headed to the restaurant to meet her. I walked in and saw her sitting in a booth with 2 older individuals at the far side of the establishment. She looked exactly like she did in class. Thin, light brown hair, green eyes, and she was wearing her signature green headband. I approached her and said hello, and I gave her a hug and sat down next to her in the booth. I assumed that these 2 older individuals across from us were her parents. Odd, I thought, but maybe they were there to chaperone. But I could tell immediately that something was wrong. The 2 older individuals looked very confused, surprised, almost bewildered, and the look on Connie's face was also one of perplexity. Eventually she said, who are you? I was shocked. I said, I'm Jason. Remember we set up a date for tonight? I assume these are your parents. It's very nice to meet you. And I reached out my hand to shake her parents' hands. They didn't return my handshake. Instead, they simply looked at their daughter and said, "Oh, didn't you forget to tell us about this, Sarah?" "Sarah?" I said. "You told me your name was Connie." She looked absolutely puzzled and said, "I'm sorry. You must have me confused with someone else." "Oh, my mistake," I replied. I then scratched my head and headed out of the restaurant to my car. I was embarrassed. Maybe she just didn't want to go out with me, I thought. She could have at least just said no instead of leading me on the charade. Defeated and humiliated, I decided to just head home. When I opened the door to my car, I heard a voice behind me say, "Hey, Jason!" And then I turned around. It was a tall, light blonde-haired woman with a large round face and blue eyes. Do I know you?" I said. "It's me, Connie. We had a date planned, remember? Where are you going?" she said. We went inside and had dinner. She was definitely Connie. She remembered all of our previous conversations over the past year. but she looked nothing like the girl that I met in class. And when I asked her why she stopped wearing her green headband, she had no recollection of ever wearing or even owning this type of headband. And up until today, I can't explain it. This is nothing spectacular, probably not even a glitch, but I have been reading stories on this group for the past days in my downtime at work, so I was probably influenced. But it happened this morning, and later while reading, I thought to myself, well, I could actually post it here. It's not so different from any other stories. Anyway, in my office we have a coat hanger with many branches, and at the end of each branch, there is a small black plastic ball, probably to protect the clothes from the sharp edges or something like that. I have been here for a few weeks, and I noticed that the balls come off pretty easily while you hang or retrieve your coat. This morning, I went to hang my jacket and bag as usual, and I heard this ball falling on the floor. I picked it up, and I stood to put it back on its place, and there was no missing ball anywhere. All the branches had their ball, and yet I had one ball in my hand. I look around and under the other coats, but all the branches had it. It could be a spare ball, but where did it fall from then? Maybe it was one of the edge of a nearby piece of furniture, but I used that to stock stuff and I never saw it there. Yet, it's a possible explanation. But I still thought that I would post it here and thought someone may enjoy it. So I have a glitch story that some could look at and equate as a potential false memory, or something that my brain just made up when I was younger. But I've always had a fantastic memory, and I know for a fact that all of this happened and how I remember it. On top of that, and something that I find interesting, is that every single time that I try to think about this or tell this story to someone, I start to get this weird feeling that I'm about to have a panic attack, which almost feels as if the Matrix or whatever it is that controls our simulative reality is trying to get me to forget this old timeline and then accept the new one. That said, I remember all of this as it actually happened, and I refuse to be pushed into some alternative timeline that isn't true. This happened back when I was 12, which was about 10 years ago. Now, I know that some of you may say, "You were a kid, so you probably just don't remember it right." But I promise you that I remember all of this very vividly and in intricate detail. At this point, my family lived in a small house in Missouri. I'm not going to say where specifically for security reasons, but it was just myself, my parents, and my brother, and we were fairly separated from most of our family, with the exception of our aunt on our mother's side. The start of this whole event happened when my paternal grandmother passed away. It was the end of June, and my brother and I were out of school for the summer when my parents got a call. Apparently, my grandmother had died unexpectedly and suddenly in her sleep, and my grandfather was trying to figure everything out in a panic. The problem was that, as stated, his only son, my father, lived in Missouri and they lived upstate New York. At this point, my dad makes a firm decision that he needs to fly up north to help his father just take care of everything, and my mom says that she's going to go with him, as he would need the emotional support by then. It was decided that my brother and I would stay with my aunt in St. Louis while my parents flew out to New York. But here's what I remember happening. I remember my aunt coming to get my brother and I, and I remember loading my stuff into the car alongside my brother, and I remember telling my parents goodbye. I specifically remember telling my parents that I hope they enjoyed New York. I remember this because it was something really stupid to say. They were going for a funeral, and they weren't going to enjoy it at all. Anyways, after that, I remember getting in the car with my aunt, and as we were driving, my aunt tells us that we are going to go to Six Flags during the week that we are staying with her. I remember being incredibly excited for it, and I remember the two of us genuinely having an amazing time with my aunt and uncle going on all the rides, and that I specifically loved the roller coasters. Overall, it was probably the best week of my childhood. We got to spend time with my aunt and uncle, and they didn't have kids, so they spoiled us. We got to go to Six Flags and really just had a great week that summer. When we got home, my parents were already back at the house, and I know I've said this a few times, but I specifically remember that my father gave me a snow globe that had the skyline of New York. This globe was absolutely gorgeous, and that I genuinely loved everything about it. It was one of my prized possessions as a child, and I kept it on a shelf. I never really touched it, but I always knew that it was there, and I genuinely loved it. Now, here is where the glitch or the timeline shift occurs. When I hit 19, I was ready to move out of the house and into my own apartment. A friend of mine and I had saved up the money to pay what we needed. We both had a steady job for our age, and we were excited to move forward with our lives. When I was packing up my room and boxing away all my stuff, I got to the point where I was clearing off my shelf, and then I paused. There were various little knickknacks, items, trophies from school, but no snow globe. I just kind of sit there and stare for a moment, trying to think about where I could have put what I considered to be one of my most cherished items as a child. I called my mom into my room and I asked her if she or dad had moved my snow globe to another shelf in the house, or if she'd seen it. My mom then asked me what snow globe I'm talking about. I tell her the one that she and dad got for me from New York. And my mom just stares at me confused and says that she and dad had never been to New York. When she said this, I started to feel incredibly strange inside, almost like having a panic attack feeling. I stepped down from the ladder and I tried to ask if she was feeling okay, and if she had forgotten when the two of them went to New York when Grandma died. And she again asked what I was talking about. I called my dad into the room and tried to talk to him about it, and he was just as confused, saying that they never went to New York ever. I tell them that when I was 12, Grandma had passed away and Grandpa was panicking because he didn't know what to do. I said that the two of them flew to New York to help him out, and my aunt came to get my brother and I, and we stayed with her in St. Louis, and that we all went to Six Flags while we were there. Then, it got even more confusing. My dad's face twisted into genuine confusion, and then he said, "Yes, when you were 12, my mother passed away unexpectedly. But they lived in Chicago. We drove to your aunt's house on the way there. She didn't come and get you." So now, with this said, I live in a timeline where my grandparents live in Chicago and not New York. In this timeline, my aunt also didn't come get us. My parents supposedly drove us to St. Louis on their way to Chicago, and they never brought back a snow globe, and they drove, they didn't fly. I don't understand how any of this is possible when I have a very vivid memory of the situation, and I recall having that snow globe my entire childhood. What's really weird is that I cannot recall the last time that I actually saw the snow globe. and I'm struggling to remember anything past getting and putting it on my shelf. And every time that I think about it, the memories are foggy and I start to get that anxious feeling. Like I said, I know this may be incredibly mundane to others, but to me, it's one of the creepiest things that's ever happened. Last Wednesday, a co-worker and I got pizza for lunch to split. I paid with my card and he gave me a $12 cash that I swear that I put in my right pocket. I made a joke about my wife knowing because our bank sends notifications after every purchase, and she was gonna be salty because it's her favorite pizza place and her favorite pizza. That night, when I got home, she heckled me a bit about it, and I explained that the dude and I split it and that he paid in cash. Jokingly, she said, "Well, I will take it as restitution for not getting any pizza." I reached into my right pocket, pulled out two $1 bills, but the $10 was gone. Not a huge problem, I just probably misplaced it, and I know that I did not have any cash besides the $12 and a $2 bill in my wallet for good luck. I wear the same pants to work every day, and I do own multiple of the same pants, but they were washed last Tuesday and safely in my drawer. I use my pockets all the time at work and sometimes come home with a pocket full of screws. Today is Tuesday, and I had definitely used my pockets on Friday, Monday, and today, and I didn't put on pants for No Pants Sunday. Today, at the end of my shift, as I emptied my pockets of all the screws that I collected over the day, I removed a $10 bill from my right pocket. If it's not the same bill, I don't know where it came from, but I also don't know how I didn't find it last week or even at the beginning of my shift today. So to give some context, I'm in Oxfordshire, UK, and earlier today while me and my family were driving home, I noticed an unusual plane. The reason it was unusual was because it was completely white. It had no logos or any of that sort. It's worth me pointing out that, as I was the one driving, I wasn't able to get the greatest of looks. Well, anyway, the plane was kinda low, perhaps having just taken off or coming into land. But the strange part here was that the plane appeared to change color. To elaborate, the plane was white initially, which was unusual enough, but changed to a gray color. Normally I would think nothing of it. However, as the plane was unusual in the first place, I had mentioned it to my partner and 5-year-old son who all saw the same thing. Some points to note about this. Number 1, we did not see the plane physically change color. It happened in a few seconds when we were driving past some trees or bushes and the line of sight was obscured. However, the military gray plane which we saw, I'm pretty certain was the same plane. This is due to the height and direction it was traveling. If it was two separate planes, they would have had to be extremely close to one another. Number 2, I'm a relatively skeptical person, and I have tried looking at this logically, but I am stumped on an actual answer. It's been a sunny day here today, and I don't believe the color change could have been due to any lighting given the differences between the colors. And lastly, number 3, if we are in a simulation, then the easiest way to describe what we saw was a rendering glitch, which means that the colors took a little too long to load. Again, this would have been something that I'd brushed off had I been the only one to witness it. But now, I'm curious to hear others' thoughts and experiences. And here are the top comments for my last video. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.